Hearts of Fire and The Nanny won't be seen tonight. Please stay tuned for this special presentation.
Good evening, I'm Billy Core from the Carolina Circle Mall Wiki. Today is Monday, August the 24th of 2015. You know, 20 years. 20 years is the equivalent of 2 decades. And it's also the equivalent of a whole lot of numbers because I can't do math right now. A lot can happen in 20 years. 20 years ago was the year 1995, which was a pretty eventful year, not just for me personally, but for a lot of things in the world. 1995 was, at least in the history of the computer world, a pretty pivotal year, not just for a certain operating system that was released that year, but 1995 was the year that the World Wide Web, or the Internet, pretty much really took off. That was when people really started to take notice of this thing called the Internet. And thanks to the Internet, nowadays you're able to watch this particular video. And for me personally in 1995, oh, that was a really big year. I was 5 years old for most of the year up until November when I turned 6. Our family purchased 2 cars that year. A white 1995 Honda Accord V6 that we got in March or April of that year, and a plain old 1995 Honda Accord LX Burgundy that we bought in July of 1995, which drove me to my very first day of kindergarten, which I celebrated the 20th anniversary of just yesterday, actually. And that car is still with us today. In fact, I was just driving it home from work about 25 minutes ago. So, that, and probably one of the most pivotal moments that year for me was the acquisition of the Packard Bell Legend 822 CDT, which is currently cut off from the video. That happened on December 5th of that year. And that Packard Bell came pre-installed with an operating system known as, if you don't mind me, I need to turn a computer on because I forgot to turn it on. Not the 822, but another one. But that Packard Bell came, excuse you, but that Packard Bell came pre-installed with an operating system known as Windows 95. And for those who don't know yet, I'm going to turn that monitor off. For those who don't know yet, today, August 24th, 2015, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the release of Windows 95. This was an exciting moment in computer history. Microsoft finally realized their dream of a usable graphical user interface. For those who, I'll do a quick little history lesson for you folks. The first version of Windows actually came out in 1985, Windows version 1. The Premier Edition, that is, came out in November of 1985. And basically was, well, it looked like a pile of garbage, to say the least. And then, for the next 10 years, Microsoft was developing this thing called Windows that would eventually put the graphical user interface on the map. And during those 10 years, Microsoft was doing a lot with the graphical user interface, even going as far as working with IBM to develop an operating system known as OS/2, which you may or may not have heard about, which was basically, and believe it or not, Windows was actually going to be a placeholder for OS/2, because Microsoft was set and had it set in stone that OS/2 was going to be the future of the graphical user interface. Well, guess what? It didn't happen. In the early 90s, Microsoft and IBM parted ways. IBM continued developing OS/2, and eventually IBM OS/2 became the greatest operating system to ever be used. In fact, everyone's using it on all of their computer systems today. Said nobody ever. Seriously, OS/2 eventually dissolved by the mid-90s, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's just how history went. Now, as far as Microsoft was concerned, in the early 90s, Microsoft was still developing Microsoft Windows, and they released Windows 3 in May of 1990, and then in April of 1992, they released Windows 3.1, which we will be taking a look at right now, which we'll see it up on the monitor in just a moment. Granted, this version of Windows 3.1 has been modified quite a bit because this is my primary MS-DOS and Windows 3.1 machine, the Packard Bell PB1750 CDT. And so let's go ahead and reposition the camera so we can take a better look. Okay, that should be a good enough angle. Get the proper mouse. But yeah, this is the program manager of Windows 3.1. Now, going back to these very, very antiquated versions of Microsoft Windows from the 1980s, Windows 1 and Windows 2 was file-centric based, meaning the main interface of Windows was not centered around programs like you see here in Windows 3.1. It was centered instead around files. And so instead of the program manager, you got a little program called the MS-DOS Executive, which was mainly just a file viewer, which you could access programs from, but it mainly focused on the files of your system, and it really, really, really was not that very intuitive. And the program manager that you see here debuted in Windows 3.0 in May of 1990, and you're seeing it right now heavily modified, courtesy of plugin for Windows, on Windows 3.1 circa 1992. Now, as you can see, the program manager, well, manages programs. Like, let's say you want to load up, let's say Microsoft PowerPoint. Now, let's ignore the Microsoft Office toolbar there. Let's pretend it doesn't even exist. Now, it's a little bit different from your typical Windows 3.1 program manager, because, like I said, I'm using plugin for Windows, so I'm really not playing too fair here. So I have it in Microsoft Applications, and then now keep in mind, Windows 3.1's program manager did not feature nested program groups. The only reason you're seeing nested program groups right now on here is because of plugin for Windows. So we'll open up Microsoft Office, and basically you just got a window full of icons that let you access programs. So we'll go ahead and open up PowerPoint. This is PowerPoint version 4.0. Welcome to PowerPoint. Before we begin working, we recommend that you go through the animated quick preview for a brief tour of PowerPoint 4.0. Yeah, you can add buttons to any toolbar. But yeah, alright, I guess we gotta do this. And that's Microsoft PowerPoint version 4.0, running on Windows 3.1. Go ahead and get out of that and see, and you can see it's not too difficult, especially if you're coming off of the MS-DOS Executive and earlier versions of Windows from the 1980s. But Microsoft still felt that this wasn't exactly right. They could do better, especially when you consider, and I forgot to even mention this, when you consider what the Apple Macintosh operating system was offering at this exact moment in history. Because compare this to Mac OS of the time, and yeah, quite a big contrast there. Although I'm not saying Windows 3.1 was a total disaster when you compare it to Mac OS, but in fact Windows 3.1, as I forgot to mention, is the first version of Windows I ever used. I mentioned this quite a bit, but the first computer I ever saw was in the summer of 1995, and that was my Aunt's Gateway 2000, which was running Windows 3.1, just as you see here, although I doubt it was running plug-in, like you see on this system here. So, Windows 3.1 was the first version of Windows I ever saw. First thing I ever saw on any kind of computer. So Windows 3.1 does kind of hold a special place in my heart, even though I really wasn't exposed to it as much as I was Windows 95, which we will get into in just a moment. Anyway, another thing you will notice about Windows 3.1 is, well, you got a desktop. That's nice. But, you know, what if you want to add some extra icons to Windows 3.1's desktop? Well, let's say we want to add a shortcut to, I don't know, Paintbrush. We'll drag it down here. Oh, wait a minute. What is this? You mean I can't drag and drop a shortcut to the desktop? Well, folks, this is another limitation of the Windows 3.1 interface. You see, the desktop on Windows 3.1 is nothing more than a way to see what programs are running at the time. As you can see, Program Manager is down here. Double click it, we go back to Program Manager. Let's open up Calculator. We'll minimize a calculator, and then we'll close out of this. Then we can minimize Program Manager, and we got two programs down here, which these aren't shortcuts. They're just it's pretty much the early version of the taskbar. We'll close out of that and bring up Program Manager again, and let's say, and let me show you something else you can do with Windows 3.1. Well, more specifically cannot do. Let's just type something up here in Windows Write. What do you want to type? Dear J. Wakefield. How dare you allow your 486 Packard Bell multimedia desktop to die? I know it was from natural causes, but for some reason I want to blame you somehow. So sorry. Sincerely, Billy Rogue Geek Core. I know I'm copying from Jay's Windows 95 documentary that he uploaded today, which, by the way, this video that I'm making can never outdo that video. He did an outstanding job on that. If you haven't seen it yet, please go to Video Sans Frontiers here on YouTube and check that out if you want to know every single thing about the history of Windows 95. But anyway, let's save this file here. We'll name it Letter to J. Wakefield. Letter to J. Wakefield, this file name is not valid. Well, your mom's not valid. Seriously though, we can't do that. You see, before Windows 95, on these older versions of Windows, now this isn't a limitation of Windows itself, but more of a limitation of MS-DOS, which Windows 3.1 ran on top of. Windows 3.1 can only handle 8.3 file names, meaning that you could only have 8 characters in your file name. So, yeah, Letter to J. Wakefield is way more than 8 characters. So, we're going to have to succumb to the system and just name it Letter. Yay. Letter. Letter.wri. Yay. I can hardly contain my excitement, folks. Yay. Anyway, we'll close out of that, but yeah, that is Windows 3.1. However, like I said, Microsoft intended to do much better than this. So, starting as soon as Windows 3.1 was released in 1992, Microsoft decided to start working on a more intuitive version of Windows, originally codenamed Windows Chicago. And no, this was not a version of Windows that would provide you with copies of Chicago's greatest hits. but it took several years of development, but we're going to now take a look at, courtesy of my childhood Packard Bell, the Legend 822 CDT, what Windows eventually became after Windows 3.1. Here we go, folks. Let's see how they improved upon this. And this is what it became, folks. Say hello to Windows 95. Released 20 years ago today, on August 24th of 1995. This is what those few years of development brought us from Microsoft. And so let's take a look and see what has changed since Windows 3.1. Most notably is the interface. Gone is the program manager. Instead, we now have a little button here that you may be kind of familiar with now. A little button that says Start. And when we put the cursor over it, it says click here to begin. Begin what? Well, you click the Start button and you see a little menu that pops up. This is known as the Start menu, which gives us various options, like options to shut down your computer, suspend your computer, a run command if you want to do a quick command line, help, find, this was a pretty big deal in Windows 95, the Windows 95 search feature, settings for control panel, your printers and taskbar, recent documents, and the programs menu, which is the most notable part of the Start menu. This pretty much gives you a list of all the programs that you have installed on your computer with easy access, which is a lot more intuitive and easier to use than the Windows 3.1 Program Manager. Because let's just do this again. Go to Start, Programs, and there's your programs. Like for instance, let's load up the Windows 95 version of PowerPoint, courtesy of Office for Windows 95, released on the same day as Windows 95. So we're also celebrating its 20th birthday. Yay! Apparently I've never used it on this computer. And there we are. That's simple. And now, let's write another letter to my good friend Jay, this time in Windows 95. So I'm going to use WordPad, which I actually always used on Windows 95 back in the day when I first had this computer in the 90s, because we did not own a copy of Microsoft Word. So this, along with Microsoft Works, was what we used for a word processor, just your standard issue WordPad brought to you from Windows 95. So let's set us up a font here. We'll go with good old-fashioned Arial, size 12, and Dear J. Wakefield, I apologize for the somewhat hateful letter you may have received from me earlier in this video when I was demonstrating Windows 3.1. Your video on the history of Windows 95 was very well done, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did. Your friend, Billy Roadgeek Core. And we'll put in a date. (8/24/15). Don't know why it didn't do the right format there, but that's one of the many quirks that you can expect with this kind of software. And we'll go ahead and save it. We'll save it to the desktop for now. Let's try naming it Letter to J. Wakefield again and see what happens. Letter to J. Wakefield. And good golly gosh, it's saved without any fuss. This is another major feature that was introduced in Windows 95. You actually have support for file names longer than 8.3. So you can name it no matter, so you can name your files no matter what. Let me start over. You can name your files anything you wanted. We're still a character limit, but it was in like the 200s, so no person in their right mind would want to name something that long. And there's our file here. We can open it back up, this time in Microsoft Word for Windows 95, which looks roughly the same as it did in WordPad. Also, if you haven't noticed this yet, the desktop looks quite a bit different than it did from Windows 3.1. We actually have shortcuts. That's right, folks, we have shortcuts. I've already made quite a few on this desktop because I haven't reformatted this computer in almost a year, pretty much, if not longer. And we can try to make another shortcut. Let's go to the Windows directory and just find a random program on here. It's quite populated on this system. Now let's make a shortcut to Sound Recorder. We can just right-click it, which, by the way, right-clicking was really not used very much in Windows 3.1. In fact, it wasn't really used in the operating system itself. Programs and program developers had to create ways to use the right-click button in their programs. So we'll go ahead and right-click it, drag it over to the desktop, tell it to create a shortcut here, and there it is, Sound Recorder. Now we'll go ahead and give it a name, and since we can give it a long file name, we'll call it Use This to Scream at Computer. There you go. Alright, now what? Well, that's basically the gist of the technical side of Windows 95. What about the fun side of Windows 95, you may be wondering? Well, Windows 95 was very, very well renowned for its game support. Not only could you run old MS-DOS games, as well as 16-bit Windows 3.1 games, such as, let's say, an old favorite of mine, Putt-Putt Joins the Parade. Windows 95 brought along its own support of its share of Windows 95 games. Oh, what can we show off that would pretty much scream Windows 95? Well, how about one of my childhood favorites that I really don't get to show on this channel much? I remember buying this game at a computer game shop at Four Seasons Town Center sometime in 1996. And this is a game that was also created by Microsoft. A little game known as Monster Truck Madness, which, as you can tell, does not require the use of a CD if you treat it right during the installation. Go ahead and create a race for ourselves. Go ahead and go with the Carolina Crusher, my favorite monster truck from the game. Really not into monster trucks. I was back in the day when this was still a new game, but I just play this now for nostalgia. What kind of race do we want to do? Let's do a circuit. We'll just race by ourselves to keep it quick and easy. We'll do the round and round race, 3 laps. And let's see what gaming was like on Windows 95. If you want to see more games for Windows 95, go back to my previous videos. And I'm also playing this with the assistance of a joystick, which you probably cannot see. I'm using the Microsoft Sidewinder 3D Pro. Joystick that was released alongside of Windows 95, I believe. I usually don't get to hear this music in the game because I usually thank you. Because most of the times I play this game, I'm usually listening to an audio CD, because one cool feature of Monster Truck Madness is if you put an audio CD into your computer's CD player, you can play audio from your music CD in the game. But because the copyright mafia would probably murder me in horrible, horrible, horrible ways, for this video I'm playing the standard game audio, which I'm really not used to. And that's Army Armstrong there. I think he was some big-time monster truck announcer. I only remember him from this game. Windows 95 could be run on a 386DX. That's the minimum processor requirement, for a minimum of 4 megabytes of RAM. No, I do not recommend doing that. I've never done it myself, but I imagine it's a very, very, very painful experience. I think the slowest I've run Windows 95 on system-wise is my Packard Bell PB1750 CDT, which is running on a 486 DX2 running at 66 megahertz. And even that's pretty sluggish. Of course, a lot of people back in the day, when Windows 95 was first released, was running it on a 486 system, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, of course, the computer we're running this on right now is a 100 megahertz Intel Pentium. Intel Pentium was introduced in 1993, but really didn't become popular until 1995. And Windows 95 was pretty much the operating system that really showed off the capabilities of the Intel Pentium processor, at least on the consumer end of things. So I do believe that the Intel Pentium did get a lot of use on early Windows NT systems, like on NT 3.1 and 3.51. And yes, the Intel Pentium was pretty popular along with Windows 3.1, believe it or not. In fact, my aunt's Gateway 2000 I mentioned earlier in this video had a Intel Pentium processor in it, also running at 100 megahertz, just like this Packard Bell here. And I don't care what anyone says, but Windows 3.1 runs amazingly on an Intel Pentium. Although I do cut it off at 100 megahertz. Anything above that, it'll get Windows 95. Below that, whichever one I feel I'm in the mood for. Now, the reason you're seeing Windows 95 on this 822 is because this is the operating system it originally shipped with, so, and I'm a stickler for that kind of stuff. I do believe we're on the last lap. Let's take a little shortcut here. Alright, get this checkpoint here. Fall off the bridge. Yeah, I have a lot of memories of this game. Music is nice, but it gets kind of irritating after a while. One of the many reasons why I typically play this game with an actual audio CD. Before you ask, no, this system does not play Crysis. I seem to get that question about once a day on my videos. That was pretty easy to do because I was the only one in said race. But yeah, that was pretty much what games designed for Windows 95 was like. Go ahead and get out of that. Now, we need to celebrate Windows 95's birthday in a way that is pretty much traditional for anyone's birthday. Let's make Windows 95 a birthday card. We'll go into Programs. Go over to Microsoft Publisher for Windows 95. Go away, Tour. Alright, let's find where the greeting cards are. Let's see, card and invitation. Let's see, special occasion, I guess. Do traditional birthday cake greeting. Well, we'll type our own text. What should we put on the front? We'll put in a little quote from a certain song that was played during the launch of Windows 95 20 years ago, courtesy of the Rolling Stones. Start me up. Alright, now what should we put on the inside? Oh, how about Happy 20th Birthday Windows 95. Thank you for shaping my computer life as a child. We have to put something on the back. It's really necessary. You know what? Let's not do it. I'm a rebel. Alright, those are all the questions. Now sit back and relax while the page wizard creates a card you have just designed. Oh, look at that. Doing all that hard work. Gotta admire it. Alright, the Page Wizard Design Assistant has finished its work. Your card is ready to print. If you want, you can easily change the pictures of the text. You know what? We don't need any of that. Start me up. Move over a little bit. Maybe zoom in just a little bit as well. Just got a sling on my phone. Something from Facebook. Go away, Facebook. I don't need you right now. We'll go to the other page here. And okay, why did you make the text the size of most household ants? Okay, let's change it to about size 32. And go ahead. We still have to just adjust a little bit. You can tell I don't use this program that much. Okay, it's centered. Okay, I see what we need to do. Okay, we're still going to have to adjust this. How do I do this? Kind of made it better. I want to know how to adjust the text box size. I know this is possible. No, I don't want a shadow. I don't want a border. I just want to change the size of the text box. Didn't mean to do that. Undo. We can Okay, that's the wrong one there. Oh, here we go. I don't know what I did, but yeah. Okay, guess we'll have to adjust the text size. Cut it down to 20. About 30. About 32. No. 24. Well, so much for that. I just ruined all I did. Okay, here we go, here we go. Let's try this again. How will this look zoomed in? Not any better. Alright, we'll just, let's get rid of all this stuff and just leave thank you. Or as Jay Wakefield would say, thank you! Okay, we've got to put one more text box in here. We need to sign it. Sincerely, Billy Core. And there we go. Zoom back out and take a look at our creation. Go to first page, second page, and the back page, which has nothing. So that's a nice little simple card for Windows 95. You know what? Let's add one more thing. Let's add a picture to this left side. Let's add some clip art. Let's add some balloons, even though I'm definitely afraid of them. Don't ask. Well, here's one. Okay, I'm telling Windows 95 happy birthday. I'm not asking it out for a date. We'll go with this one here. Okay, thank you for that unnecessary bit of info. Okay. There we go. Nice little set of balloons. Now I think we're okay to save it. We'll save it to my documents, because they're my documents, not your documents. Windows 95 birthday card. And you know what? Let's go ahead and print it. But you're probably wondering, hey Billy, how do you have a printer hooked up to this 20-year-old computer? Well, technically I don't, but technically I do. You may recall in my Compact Armada 1575 DMT video, I showed off a feature of Adobe Acrobat version 3 where you could print to a PDF file. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to go to print, and we're not going to load the printer driver. You can't plan for this stuff, folks. Real quick, let me check the printers. It's there. It's set as default. Let's go to print setup. Okay, do whatever you want. Okay, here we are. I don't know what I did, but it's working now, so we'll save it as card.pdf. Title, Windows 95 birthday card. Excuse me. And it's printing to a PDF file. Okay, I don't know why that troubleshooter opened. Yeah, go ahead and save it. And guess what, folks? We need to take a look at that PDF file real quick. And here it is. It's labeled card. Open up Acrobat Exchange 3.0. Hearing a strange noise. And that's what the card looks like. Of course, it would look better if this was on actual paper. But I don't have a physical printer hooked up to this system. But yeah, that's a pretty cool feature of Adobe Acrobat version 3. If you can't print to an official printer, you can still print to a PDF. So, 20 years, folks. 20 years of Windows 95. And now we look at Windows 10 20 years later, which was released about a month ago. And while it's still a complete departure from what we were doing 20 years ago with a computer, for obvious reasons, it's still a very similar concept and a very similar interface. You still have your desktop where you can put icons on it. You still have a start button and start menu, which was sadly taken away in Windows 8, which Microsoft thankfully realized the error of their ways and put it back into Windows 10. And now in Windows 10 we have a very different type of start menu, but guess what? It's pretty much the same idea as what we have in Windows 95 here. Although with Windows 10 you do get those live tiles, which I have to admit are pretty cool. It's nice to open up the start menu and get the weather for your current city. So yeah, very cool feature there. So yeah, 20 years. It's hard to believe, folks. This is what I used to learn how to use a computer. My main career right now in the IT world owes it all to Windows 95. This here. You know, it's hard to believe 20 years have passed since this was released, with Bill Gates and Jay Leno showing off how you can change your applications on the taskbar quicker than Bill Clinton. Yep. Multitasking was definitely enhanced in Windows 95. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much all we can do right now to show off. Happy birthday, Windows 95. Happy birthday. Before we go, I think we ought to play a WAV file that I found. Don't know what it is, but this WAV file, I think, is more than appropriate to show off how much I appreciate Windows 95's 20 years of service. Here we go, folks. It reproduced! Ah!